Awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda, for joining us today. So first of all, I would love to learn a little bit more about your background and, what you did before joining SparkToro, what you're doing at SparkToro now, to kind of put our conversation about, the impact that B2C marketing and that mindset can have on improving your B2B marketing. And something I always forget to do is introducing myself. So I'm Amelia. I'm heading marketing at Userpilot, which is a product growth platform for SaaS companies that helps reduce churn, improve trial to paid conversion and retention rates with smart enough experiences. Yeah, but the floor is yours, Amanda. So yeah, let's start.
Great. Yeah. So I am the VP of Marketing at SparkToro, the audience research startup. We provide tools for marketers or anybody who wants to better understand their audience. Prior to this, I've had, actually, marketing is my third career, but within marketing, I have experience across direct-to-consumer brands, regular consumer brands, agency side. But prior to this, I actually worked at a test kitchen once. I worked at the Los Angeles Times test kitchen where I tested some of the recipes. We tested every recipe at least twice before it was published. So that was a really fun job to have. And then prior to that,
like a dream job for me as well.
It was so much fun. We could talk about food too. Prior to that, I was in tech journalism. So I used to work at gigaom.com and paidcontent.org, which are some of the original digital media and tech news sites. This was sort of in the days when TechCrunch was also new and up and coming. And so a lot of my career, it broadly spans tech, but within that, journalism, content marketing, demand generation, all that good stuff.
Gotcha. Cool. That's a broad experience. I had my stab at journalism as well, actually, like several years and lifetimes ago, it seems, but it definitely helps. Especially in content marketing, I feel like the principles of good journalism like really translate into that field. So as a VP of marketing at SparkToro, what is that you actually do? What is your average day like? Because obviously the definitions change from one company to another. So I'm curious what you work on most.
Yeah, so I mean, SparkToro really is just a three-person company. It's really just the three of us. It's myself and co-founders Ren Fishkin and Casey Henry. So on being responsible for marketing, I added such a small company. I'm also responsible for customer support. So we all kind of take turns answering customer support queries, and also work on the product side. So working closely with, like for instance, last fall we worked to improve our onboarding sequence. So we could talk a little bit more about that as well. But most of my day-to-day is we very much do have a content-led growth strategy, largely because that's the proficiency of myself and our CEO Ren Fishkin. So we write blog posts. We host these monthly webinars of our office hours series where we essentially give presentations on marketing strategy, where it's better but not required if you use SparkToro. We also have an upcoming virtual summit, which I could talk about later. And we also have a bi-weekly newsletter. So just a lot of different kinds of content which propel our growth.
Wow, that's a lot of work. Like we have now a pretty big content team. So yeah, I'm quite, impressed that you're handling this all together, just the three of you. I'm curious, I cyberstalked you basically, and I noticed you used to work at Fitbit, but in the B2B sector, right? And now you work at kind of a B2B tool, but you mentioned that it can also be used by individuals. So I guess, in your case, there wasn't like a clear cut between, okay, this is a B2B product. We're only going to, promote it in a certain enterprisey B2B way versus, and the other way around, right? Like, oh, this is a direct to consumer brand, or this is typically like consumer product, so we're not going to promote it to businesses. So I'm curious, to cut the long story short, what you did at Fitbit and how this experience put things into perspective for you in terms of, you know, whether there is actually such thing as B2B versus B2C marketing.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate this question. So when I was at Fitbit, this was several years ago now, I was the second person to join their B2B marketing team. So for the company itself, I think when I joined, Fitbit as a consumer brand had been around for, I think, about like 6 or 7 years at that point. But the B2B side was a lot newer. And the B2B side grew very much organically. Like B2B at Fitbit meant, yes, it meant trackers in bulk sent to employers. So if an employer was like, hey, I want to buy, 200 Fitbits for my team and have everyone get healthier, that'd be great.
Gotcha.
So we sold that, but we also sold a custom reporting dashboard, and as well as, other tools and sort of communications to help HR and wellness leaders run corporate wellness programs. And this really grew from people reaching out to the support team at Fitbit asking, hey, do you do an employer like wellness program? So that was a really fun, interesting sort of space to enter, because with the explosive organic growth, like at that point that I had joined, I think B2B had been around for close to a year, but had grown entirely through inbound. And so when I joined as a content marketing manager. There wasn't a lot of growth. Like it wasn't like, oh my gosh, we got to grow to like, 10x within the first month. It was like, hey, we have this amazing demand, but people have a lot of questions on how to use Fitbit, like how to get great utility out of this product. So our content focused largely on that kind of education. So where I think a classic sort of SEO strategy would focus on the top line awareness education of like, maybe here's why corporate wellness is important. Our content kind of really started from the bottom of the funnel, which was like, here's how to use this product. Here's what this means for your corporate wellness program. So we had some really interesting challenges and opportunities for us there. So we really started where the needs were and then kind of worked our way up. So by the time during the sort of end of my tenure at Fitbit, then we were getting more into that top line SEO stuff. Like, what is a corporate wellness program? What is an activity challenge? How to run an activity challenge, all that kinds of content. And I can pause there, actually.
Wow, it sounds like you really pioneered what has since become a staple. And, at least like SEO content, I see people preaching. I preach that too all the time, that you should actually flip the funnel and start from the bottom and then get to the top of the funnel keywords. But you're right that a lot of B2C brands focus on awareness, right? And, it's kind of building the brand reputation first as well. And, especially with lifestyle B2C brands, it's more about selling the feelings and kind of engendering FOMO in their potential customers rather than focusing on the product features. So that's like a big difference. But on the flip side, how do you think B2B brands could implement parts of this in their content strategy? Because on the other hand, you don't want to be just talking features and never appealing to people's emotions, because even enterprise customers buy because they want to feel in a certain way as a result, right?
Yeah. I mean, like, you probably see this all the time, Amelia, like where people, I feel like marketers, maybe this is just in our world, I don't know. I feel like we're starting to see more marketers say like, B2B marketers need to take a page from D2C.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is what you're saying, engineering some degree of FOMO where it makes sense, right? But also really tapping into the emotional side of things. Like, I think every purchase is emotional. It's maybe a different kind of emotional, right? Like maybe you as a buyer, as a B2B buyer, maybe if you sign up for SparkToro, you're not going to have that same feeling of like, oh, I'm so excited for my new leggings to come in the mail. Like a little bit of a different feeling, but there's still that emotion or the painful problem you're solving of like, oh, I hate pulling reports for this thing. Like, this is such a drag. I want something else. I want a tool that will do this for me. Or like, oh my gosh, like doing a bunch of user research surveys. It's so important, or user research interviews. It's so important, but gosh, like, as an introvert, it takes so much out of me, and it's so hard to spend, hours a day on this thing, where, the emotion there, right, is like, it's hard to do. It takes a lot of energy. What I'm not saying is it sucks. It doesn't suck. Customer interviews are awesome. They're just really tiring, right? So like, I think being able to parse through those emotions and speak to those very real sort of pain points, those feelings, that's really important for B2B marketers to do. And I think D2C brands do this so well, right? When they show the frustration, or even when you look at these like old school late night TV infomercials where they show a ridiculous consumer product, like somebody opening a carton of milk, right? And it sprays everywhere. And they're like, oh God, like it looks so cheesy, but it's tapping into that real side of things where sometimes when you're opening a carton of milk, it is kind of hard to do, right? You can't really get through the cardboard. It is frustrating, but yeah.
We may also laugh at these informationals. Okay, I'm not going to try. You know what I mean? These ads, because we're so used to the design solutions right now that have actually solved these problems. More B2B brands I've noticed on LinkedIn or, on Facebook that they do have ads that are more kind of focusing on the problem, right, of their target audience, of their like ICPs, ideal customer personas, rather than just on the product features, which is cool. Like what comes to mind is Monday.com, for instance, where they're showing like the frustration of planning the everyday workflows, etc., and how Monday comes in and solves these issues. I wonder how you do that in SparkToro. If you could like explain a bit more what your users use SparkToro for, and how you're having these conversations with them through your content, through your newsletter, webinars, the blog content, in a way that appeals more to their problems.
Yeah. So, I mean, the way our tool works, our core offering is we help people find their audience's sources of influence. So the thing I really want to highlight is sources of influence, not influencers. That's different. An influencer can be a source of influence, sure. But sources of influence is more encompassing of maybe podcasts people listen to, YouTube channels they subscribe to, social accounts they follow, websites they frequent, press they pay attention to, right? That's a little bit more of a holistic picture of what is actually influencing an audience. And SparkToro helps you uncover that simply by searching for things like the way an audience might self-describe. So we have a search function that is, my audience uses these words in their profile, right? So people might send on public social media, you might identify as like a marketing manager, a CEO, a product manager, right? People would put that in their bios. So we can give you a sense of people who self-identify as product managers. Here are the podcasts they listen to. So that's pretty much what our offering is. And the way that we support our customers in this, in sort of the content that we create, is, I guess we look at this as like higher level, I guess. The way we look at this is like we know our audience is, they're smart people. Like they're competent marketers. They already know what they're doing. Like they know how to run a Facebook campaign. They know how to make a PR strategy. They know what SEO is. Like they know all these things. And we are the sort of secret sauce or secret weapon for them to help them get to that next level. So the way that we talk to our audience it's not, here's what a buyer persona is and here's how to make one. It's more of, you already know what this is. Like there are tons of awesome resources on creating a buyer persona. What we will encourage you to do is think a next level up and think about an audience persona. think about how your marketing strategy can be better encompassing of your whole audience and not just the people who buy your product. And here's why you should care about those things, right? So this is sort of like maybe intermediate, maybe advanced level marketers who's our target audience, and we create content for them. And so a challenge there is when when you are in marketing and you have a couple of years under your belt, you kind of stop searching for, this is an SEO thing, right? You kind of stop searching for some of those high volume search terms, right? Like you, Amelia, I bet you did not Google what is a buyer persona recently. Like you already know what that is, right? But you might be thinking about like, well, what do I do next? Right. And there isn't really an agreed upon search term for what happens next. Like maybe some people search for what do I do after buyer persona, right? But I'm going to wager that there aren't a ton of queries for that. So that's kind of where the audience persona thing steps in. Now, people might not be searching for audience persona either, but it's a newer idea. That idea can get some reach for us on social media. It can get shared amongst the marketing community. And that's sort of how it moves forward. Hopefully, a few months from now, maybe a year from now, people will be searching for audience persona. So our goal is or our strategy is kind of around like, let's try to come up with the content that people are going to need 6 months from now.
Wow. Yeah, I know the challenges of this strategy because we also talk about a lot of like sophisticated product adoption ideas. We actually, I think, like coined a few terms in the digital adoption space, so to say, secondary onboarding or continuous onboarding, where it doesn't stop with the new users, but you keep onboarding your old users on your new features and like keep driving values. And it is challenging, but yeah, it's also something you have to do when you work on an innovative product, right, like yours. I'm curious, like with all that we've discussed, what do you think are the common mistakes that B2B marketers, especially in innovative products like yours, make?
Sorry, some common mistakes you think we make?
Yeah. Like,
this is tough. I think some common mistakes we make in this field is dumbing down the concepts a little too much, right? I think, and this is difficult because there's nuance here, and I know that comes from a good place, right? I think the challenge is we don't want to recreate or repackage our content under the assumption that our customer isn't smart, right? Or that they don't know what they're doing. But at the same time, you also need to set up the context, right? Maybe an introductory paragraph or the beginning of a webinar where like you're trying to set the stage for what you are for what you are about to say. And I think in doing that, sometimes we kind of get into that sort of, let me explain this concept to you, when it's, no, you don't have to explain the concept. Maybe you need to set the situation or like give us some exposition, not so much the definitions, if that makes any sense. So thinking about like, maybe I would just reframe this as assume that your customer is smart and competent and so good at what they do, and you are their supporting player and helping them get to that next level.
Yeah. I mean, especially in relation to what you said about audience research and how like we don't really do that much yet. We don't really even search for this term. I would also say that this dumbing down of content might be an extension of not doing enough audience research. I think an interesting feature that you mentioned in SparkToro is being able to search for how people talk about themselves. And I realized that, when I sometimes go to customer calls with the CSM or, like demo calls with our AEs, with the salespeople, I realized that our customers or prospects sometimes talk about the problems they have in a very different way than I would. And, you know, it's only through doing this audience research that you can realize where your audience actually is, both in terms of the language they use to talk about their problems, to talk about themselves, and also their level of competence. And I think over time, as we are so busy, like chasing certain KPIs, right? We don't have enough time to actually sit down with our audience and do proper research. And we have to like keep doing that. I would say every quarter, you should be having at least a few of these calls to, and, you know, kind of revisit your notes, do some research again to basically check if your audience is still where it was, right, a while ago, because trends change so quickly in our environment, and the level of awareness can also change. So yeah, that's super interesting. Like, I wanted to change the subject a bit and like ask you how your previous experiences, maybe even the completely unrelated ones or the slightly related ones, like say tech journalism, contribute to your career as a marketer now and your work at SparkToro especially.
Yeah. So I think the most where this kind of comes full circle for me is truly the product that SparkToro creates, that we sell, that we create, it's representative of how I have always approached marketing. It's basically the tool that I wish I had many years ago. And the best way for me to explain this, I guess, is in two ways. So when I first got into marketing, this was at a direct-to-consumer snack company called NatureBox. I was there to run content, social media, and I had the journalism background at this point. And, early stage startup, it was like 17 of us or 18 of us when I had joined. And there were a couple of us marketers, but we didn't have all of our marketing functions like fully built out, right? So some of us were just pinch hitting on random marketing things. So I was the content person with the journalism background. And so it sort of just naturally made sense for me to run some of our early PR efforts, our public relations efforts. And the way that I approached PR was based on my experience as a journalist. So things like, cold emailing a bunch of journalists, like, hey, here's our pitch, raise a round of funding, we sell these snacks, like, check us out. Like, that's a pretty, it's not a good pitch, but it's a kind of like typical pitch that I think many reporters they do get, right? Like, and I've been on that side of the table where I've received these very general pitches where I'm like, I know they're seeing this as a numbers game and they're just trying to send this to as many people as possible, which reflexively, I was like, this is not a good use of time. Like, I don't think this is a good way to go about pitching people. Like, sure, you can blast this email out to your list of like 1,000 journalists, like a list that you bought somewhere, or you can spend like a little bit more time, write a tailored pitch to like a list of like 20 journalists in a day, and then reach out to them individually and say something like that is meaningful and personal. That's like, hey, writer at Food Navigator USA. You were recently writing about foods with GMOs and like why they're harmful, or, we have, I work for this snack company where we have a bunch of snack options for people who are mindful about these things. We also raise a round of funding. We're growing really quickly. I would love for you to cover us and maybe interview our CEO. Like something like that, that is like, it shows that I care about the publication or the journalist. It shows that I'm paying attention to their writing and to the current landscape in general, and then pitching where my offering fits in. So that was something that I was kind of intuitively already doing, because I felt like, well, isn't this how people should approach things? And that's core to what we do at SparkToro. Like, we're at SparkToro so I was doing all this manually. I was looking up all the food related websites or press, reading through all the publications, like reading through, like skimming all the articles and stuff. But just doing it all myself, just by Googling things and like following breadcrumbs everywhere. Now, SparkToro will give you a list of these websites where you can, search for my audience frequently talks about GMO foods, for instance, and then look for the press, relevant press there. You'll get that list of media, and that would give you that starting point. That would have helped me, like that would have cut my time in half, but I still would have been able to drive similar results. So where this comes full circle is, oh my gosh, this fulfills a very, very real pain point that I had many years ago. And I wish more people would approach marketing in this way.
Yeah, I mean, this couldn't resonate more with me. Like, we're doing outreach as well, and we always try to personalize the emails both for the direct person and the company. And as you said, it all boils down to doing the audience research and not being all about you, but actually being about the recipient as well, like what's in it for them. Like the example you mentioned with the healthy snacks company, for instance, like, why should this journalist write about you? Like, how does this align with their interests and what they are publishing about? So yeah, totally. Super interesting product, Amanda. I'm really, curious to check it out. Actually, I did check you out. That was so long ago. I think you were still like in super early beta. That was, let me tell you, I think it was January or February 2020.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I got a link from my colleague Azar, and I was looking up some potential speakers for Product Drive, which is coming up really soon on the 5th of October, 4th and 5th of October. And we will be hosting Rand from your team as well. Thank you so much for your time today, and yeah, walking us through your career and how these aspects of B2B and B2C marketing overlap. How can our audience find you if they have any question after watching a replay of this webinar?
Yeah, so people can find me on Twitter and on LinkedIn. My username is Amanda Nat. I also write a weekly or so newsletter on Substack now, but amandanat.com, you can subscribe there. And then, of course, SparkToro.com, check us out. We also have the audience research newsletter. But with SparkToro, you can create free accounts and you can get some value out of that just from having the sampling of searches. So check us out.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Amanda, and have a great rest of your day.
You as well. Thank you, Amelia. Thank you for having me.